Be sure to subscribe to the Healthcare Security Cast so you don't miss a single episode. We're on multiple platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Audible, just about anywhere where you can listen to a podcast. For links to all of these sites, for links to join the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, or if you're interested in being a guest or being a sponsor, you can find all of this through one link. Check out our link tree at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. And before we get into the show, I just want to thank our sponsors, 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit 3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetech, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetech, that's GENETEC.com. And also the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit 360lifetransformations.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Thursday, January 28th. I'm joined today by Kristen Harcourt. Kristen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Likewise. Well, I'll get in and we'll get right in there. And I'm going to ask you the question that I start off by asking everyone, and it's just an opportunity for us to get to know the guest. But who is Kristen Harcourt?
You know, it's funny, Brian, it sounds like an easy question, but it's actually a hard question because it's really big. It really makes you take a step back and ask, like, who is Kristen Harcourt? Because I think we have so many different identities. And so even when I heard that question, I think of my identity as a CEO, my identity as a mom, as a wife, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend. And I think that goes to me being very whole person focused. So when I think about who's Kristen Harcourt, I think of it as someone who really tries to live and breathe her values and show up in the world as someone who has a lot of compassion, who looks at how to be inclusive, to make everybody feel seen and heard. And so that's the overarching of who I think Kristen Harcourt is, someone who really wants to connect with everyone human to human. And to me, what I love to do as I'm showing up in the world is being somebody who models what's possible and models what I believe leadership can be. And that's when I really think about who I am, that's what I want to be every day, to think about me living into the best version of myself in order to help others and give them permission to do the same thing and inspire them as well.
Excellent. And the one thing that you mentioned was, the CEO side of yourself. Now, can you talk to us about the work that you do and what led to you getting into this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely an interesting journey in that I was one of those people when I graduated, when I went into university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I just thought, I don't really want to go into the real world yet. So continuing to educate myself feels like a smart thing to do. So did my undergraduate in sociology and psychology, and definitely the psychology piece, always fascinated by humans and human behavior and understanding why we do the things that we do, why we think the way we think. And having said that, graduating with a degree in that area, it's open. So open to lots of possibilities, but it also can be hard to focus on, like, what exactly does that look like in terms of a career? And so when I first went out there, it was really experimenting. And I started off with a little bit of sales and marketing and customer service, which I think was a really great journey, because if you're doing customer service really well, it's about really building that skill of listening. And then from there, I have to say that the first couple of positions that I had, I wouldn't necessarily describe the leaders that I had as individuals who are inspiring or leaders who maybe got training and development on how to lead people. So people who are perhaps did well as individual contributors got into leadership and really didn't know what that looked like and what that meant. And so what ended up happening when I started to see those different leaders who weren't necessarily having those skills. I recognized that a part of me wanted to be able to learn more about that and be able to teach people around what it looks like to actually be a better leader. And I also started to recognize what it looks like to really create work environments where people thrive and what those characteristics and what that culture looks like when that's happening. And so that's what really got me passionate about the whole area of HR, leadership development, people and culture. And that took me on a journey of doing a lot of work with organizations from a consulting perspective on how to really develop and hire top talents, to have a talent management strategy. Some companies don't really have a strategy around that. And what does it look like to hire the right people? And then once you get those right people in the door, what are you doing to help engage those individuals, coach them, create an amazing environment where they want to continue to reach their potential, grow, and innovate? And then eventually that led 4 years ago to me getting to a place where I was now ready to do my own thing and start my own company. And that's really focused on those areas as well. So really helping leaders to thrive, helping organizations understand what it looks like to help leaders to thrive. So doing leadership coaching, training, facilitating, and doing keynotes and speaking. Right now it's North America, but really my goal doing that globally so that I can use my voice to make a positive impact.
Excellent. So, just for me to summarize, it sounds like this was something that kind of came organically from an area where you just saw a gap where leaders just weren't getting the training that they needed. And we see that a lot. A lot of individuals are great contributors, but then when they step into that next role, they're just not prepared for what they're going to face. So would that be fair to say it kind of grew organically from that? It wasn't something that you had originally planned to do.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I noted when I went back and looked is I've always naturally been a coach. I just didn't have the word to describe it. I didn't know that's what I was doing. So whether it was friends, family, like I was a person people would come to, but it wouldn't be me advising them and telling them what to do. It would be me asking questions to help them get to what those answers are for themselves. Oh, I was coaching. So I've been doing that for many years. I just didn't know that's what it was called.
Okay, perfect. Now, given your expertise, one thing that we'll be discussing today is leadership. This is actually the first podcast of a series that we're going to be doing. We'll be doing one monthly, just focusing on leadership topics. But today we're going to emphasize self-leadership. So can you share what you feel are the important elements of self-leadership? And then if it's okay, we'll do a deep dive with each one after you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds wonderful. I think when we start to think about self-leadership, what I notice a lot is people are on autopilot. They have busy days, they have busy lives. So they're go, 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 go. And they're not really creating time and space to really ask themselves, who am I? What do I want? How do I want to show up? What does that look like aspirationally? Who are the people who inspire me and are modeling what it looks like to be a leader? And then who are the individuals that I'm bringing into my circle to be able to support me in order to get to that aspiration around what that looks like to be a leader and support you in that. For me, when I think about self-leadership, it's a journey in that there's a lot of growth. And there's a lot of discomfort, and there's a lot of looking ourselves in the mirror and taking ownership and responsibility for maybe things that we don't want to take ownership and responsibility. And sometimes it's easier to point fingers at everybody else, that it's everyone else's issue as opposed to our own issue. So really understanding, like, how are we impacting the people around us, and how can we, instead of expecting everybody else to change, how can we shift in the way we're showing up? And to me, that's a journey. It's an ever evolving journey that never ends. And so to me, as you continue to do that, it's like the version of leader that you are today and the person you are a year today, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, it's really not the same person, because it's you continuously evolving into that fullest version, that fullest expression of yourself, as not just as a leader, but as a human.
Excellent. So the one thing that kind of sticks out for me there from what you're saying is self-awareness. And I guess, how would you explain self-awareness, and why is it important in a leadership role?
Self-awareness. Self-awareness is an interesting one in that it's funny whenever I do talks and I ask people, like, how many people would say that you think you have high self-awareness? And like 60% of the room will put their hand up and say, oh yeah, I have really, really high self-awareness. And that already shows the lack of self-awareness, because a lot of the research actually points to the fact that like around 8 to 10% of the population has really, really, really strong self-awareness. And I don't mean that in a bad way at all. There's just that we have some blind spots and we have some gaps and we have some things and behaviors that we do that just they're happening unconsciously without us realizing it. And so we're going throughout our day and there's just some things that we're doing, and it's a lot of times it's just conditioning from what we've seen growing up and the people around us. And unless somebody is kind enough in a loving way to tell you some of the things that you're doing and the way that you're impacting them, you don't necessarily know some of those ways that you're showing up. And so to me, self-awareness is around wanting to make an effort and ask the questions to see where might you not be aware of some of the ways that you're impacting people, not deliberately, but that you could be showing up even more powerfully because maybe you're impacting them in a way that you didn't intend.
Absolutely. And I think, just listening to what you're saying, I feel like part of it is that we are always the hero of our own story. Not, I shouldn't say always, but, by default, we kind of are. We see things through our own perspective, and, you process things through your own perspective. I guess to be self-aware, you almost have to, actually, I can't even say almost. I feel like you have to just look at yourself from someone else's perspective. You have to constantly be getting out of your own perspective to be self-aware. Would you, I see you nodding your head. Would you agree with that, I guess?
Yeah. And then it's recognizing, I think what's I say so often is what can be a superpower and a strength in one situation can be a gap in another situation. So as an example, we have all these different people that we're constantly interacting with, who different personalities, different ways of seeing the world, different ways of interacting. And so what might work really well with one team member might actually really drive another team member crazy. And so I think about things like, some people really love autonomy, and then other people, they actually want more direction. So think about those employees. And I'm sure, Brian, you've experienced this with people on your team where you just kind of give them the high level thing and then they run with it because they want to be kind of part of the co-creation process and start to figure out what it looks like on their own. And then you have other people where I wish Brian would give me more details. I want more information. I don't really understand. I don't know the big picture, and they really need a lot more guidance. So, and I'm going to give leaders credit, and for it is difficult, right? Because you're constantly shifting and assessing, and what works best with this person. And one of the things that I get pushback from a lot from leaders when I say that, well, Kristen, I thought you said that I'm supposed to show up as my authentic self. So I just go and be who I am. And then everybody should just, go with who I am, because if I'm starting to shift and change, then I'm not being authentic. No, that's not how it works, right? It's not that you're now trying to be somebody that you're not, but you're trying to figure out what's the best way to create a relationship that's going to be most effective with this individual. And sometimes that's about trial and error and asking the question. If you think about my leadership, what's working really well for you and what's not working so well, and how could I do that better? And asking that of your direct reports, asking that of peers, asking that of your boss, and recognizing that the first time you ask them that question, they might say, nothing. I mean, you're awesome. Like, there's nothing you need to change. But the fifth time you ask that, they might say, because now there's the trust and they recognize, oh, you really want to hear what I have to say. They might start to be a little bit more honest with their feedback.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. So that kind of answers part of my next question, but what are some of the things that we can do to develop and improve our own self-awareness?
Yeah. So I think one of them is about asking the questions, but then also as you start to recognize, so let's just say you are starting to get feedback and something that you keep on hearing consistently is, you don't listen that well. So it feels like when we're in a meeting that you're thinking about the next thing on your to-do list, or that you're thinking about the next meeting and you're looking at your phone or you're distracted. So it doesn't feel like you're really listening to me. So if you're deciding as a leader that that's something that you want to really work on, then you want to be vulnerable and commit to it and let the people around you know. So, I notice I've gotten this feedback that I'm not doing a really good job of listening. And that's something where I want to make a concerted effort to get better at that skill. So I want you to call me out when I'm not doing that. I want you to call me out when I'm looking distracted. And as I always say, a great place to start with this, because it can sometimes feel a little bit more vulnerable in the workplace. Ask it to people that you trust, like significant others, family members. They are super happy to be that person. They are very, very happy to be that person who's going to call you out. And you need that, right? Because you need someone who's telling you, because now you have someone who's helping you to keep you accountable, but you're also saying out loud, like, I believe in this. I recognize it's somewhere that I struggle. I want to do something with it. And I want the people around me to actually let me know when I'm doing it well. So you're also getting you're getting some celebration for your progress. And people are telling you like, oh, I have to say, like, when we were having that conversation at dinner, I really felt like you were listening to me. And normally I don't feel like you're listening when I'm talking to you about my day.
Yeah, fair enough too. And I guess one of the things I found for myself is if you are, I think you have to understand the situations where you're not going to listen. So, and you have to be ready to tell a person, this probably isn't a good time. Can we, can we have this conversation a little bit later? Or, because I find myself doing that sometimes. My wife will be talking to me and I'm drifting off because it's just, I've been, for example, if I've been working all day and then, we're all in this, most of us are in this work from home environment. I go upstairs and I'm just kind of trying to decompress and she's wanting to fill me in on what I've missed. Sometimes that's not the best time. So I think it's recognizing that, either being able to shift to just doing more listening, or having to say, okay, can we have this conversation later? I think is a part of it as well.
100%. I think that's such a great example that you shared, because a part of self-leadership is also recognizing your needs and when you're able to show up as your most resourceful self. And so absolutely, there's times where my kids are like, we're running in, they want to really share something, and I can tell it's something that they really want me to be focused on what they have to say. And I will say in that moment, and I think it's modeling, it's a great thing for them to learn to do. And then again, I'm giving you examples of when I'm being conscious. I'm very unconscious at times too, right? I'm not going to be always doing this perfectly. I'm a work in progress too. But when I am being in that place where I can respond instead of reacting, I might say, I really want to hear, like, I can tell what you're about to share with me. It really matters to you. And I really want to give you my full attention. And mommy is just finishing something off at work and I'm not going to be able to give you my full attention. So can we talk in a half an hour? But it's the same. It doesn't have to be like me talking as the mommy. It can also be with a coworker, right? So somebody's called in, there's a bigger situation where you can't do it in 5 minutes. I want to really give you the time for this conversation. I think it's an important conversation. And I recognize that in this moment, I've got 5 to 10 minutes. I'm about to jump in another meeting. So I just want you to know this is important. I see you, I hear you, and I really want to give it the time and effort it deserves.
Yeah, actually, and that gives me another example too. There's sometimes when I see the phone ringing and I look at the phone and I know I have 5 minutes, but I know the person who's calling, the shortest conversation that we're going to possibly have is 20 minutes, even if it's something small. So, in those situations, like, okay, I'm going to have to call this person back. So I think it's, understanding both.
Yes, boundaries. That's a great boundary, right? Because I think what happens is sometimes people feel like, and this is where they're actually not as productive, is that they feel they need to always be there for everybody else. So as soon as and then what happens to their priorities, everybody else's priority becomes their priority. And so if you're in the middle of about to do something, it's not actually best for either of you to jump in that conversation, because now it's almost like you could be spending that 5 minutes to be prepared, mentally grounded for your next meeting. So that's you really holding some great boundaries.
Great. Now I kind of took you down a rabbit hole there, but the one thing I want to kind of go back to that you were talking about was at least the concept of emotional intelligence and just understanding other people and the differences between other people. Now, this isn't a new idea by any means. How does emotional intelligence impact leadership?
Yes. Absolutely not a new idea, but I think what's happening now that wasn't before is it was kind of like emotional intelligence was put in, there's one camp or the other camp. And it's like the people who are, oh, it's the touchy feely, it's the soft stuff. And then there's the other camp, like, oh, we're more sciencey and analytical. And so this emotional intelligence stuff, that's not for us. Those people, that's okay. What's really I've noticed in the last, definitely in my work in the last, for sure, like 10 years, but even more so I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, people who previously were in that camp, the ones who were very linear and like, oh, it's not required for me, they're understanding, emotional intelligence is for all humans. It's for all leaders. Because as you start to develop your emotional intelligence, you can achieve more. You are going to be more successful in the work that you do because the way you interact with others, the way you're aware of how you're showing up and when is the best time to have a conversation, your ability to problem solve, your ability to relate to others and understand what's going on with them and when to have a conversation and when not to have a conversation, when to acknowledge what they're going through and what they're experiencing. We're a whole bunch of humans, so you can't take the human part out. We are emotional beings. And so the more people start to really, really get this, and I really feel like organizations have gotten it, and they start to recognize not only is it really going to have a big impact on the bottom line, because you have more emotionally intelligent leaders, everything gets done more effectively. But you have an onus as an organization to create an environment where people are showing up with compassion and caring about the humans around them. And so as you really honor that and provide training or ways that people can get more competent and develop and build that emotional intelligence muscle, you create an environment where much more effective work is being done, and people feel good about going to work every day because they feel like they have leaders who care about them. And I've been talking a lot about leaders. I don't believe leaders just, you have to have the title of a leader. We are all leaders. And so the way somebody who shows up and around their peers, who's not necessarily a leader as title, they're modeling that behavior for others and showing them that there's a different way of showing up. And guess what? It makes everything run a lot more smoothly.
Excellent. Now, the other thing that kind of stood out for me as well was the concept of mindfulness or just mindset. It's another topic we hear about quite a bit as well. Now, do you want to kind of start by defining mindset and mindfulness and kind of what the difference is between the two, or is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, I do. In the way that I use the word mindset and mindfulness, I think there is. I think in that both of them is about paying more attention to your thoughts, but they can be in different ways. So when I think about mindset, and Carol Dweck has done a lot of really wonderful work around this, specifically around the differences between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And so when you think about mindset, even for myself as an entrepreneur, and when you think about that first year starting a business or the first couple of years, from my experience, what really is the thing that you need to be focusing on the most is that actually the mindset piece. And where people struggle is the mindset, because the mindset is when you start to become more aware of the stories that you're creating and how those stories are impacting how you're now interacting, showing up, the behaviors around it. So when I think of mindset, you can be having thought and stories that are really going to empower you. So again, using the entrepreneur example, the story could be, I didn't have any business that can't come in this week. I'm never going to have business that comes in this week. I'm never going to be able to be a successful entrepreneur. I'm going to fail. So that's mindset. So you see that story that happened, that story is going to just keep on ballooning into some emotions that aren't going to be very powerful. So that's really having a fixed mindset. It's always going to be like this. I'm always going to fail, as an example. When you start to think about the mindset and when it's having a more empowering mindset, it's when how you're framing a situation. So I might frame a situation, nothing happened this week, but you know what? I'm going to celebrate that I did these 3 action items and I took some forward momentum and I made some progress. And I had 3 or 4 really good conversations this week. So it's really being aware of what's that story, what are those thoughts, what are those beliefs, and are there limiting beliefs showing up, or are we in the place of empowering beliefs? When I think of mindfulness, it's again being aware of your thoughts. And I like to think of mindfulness is around training your brain and recognizing, because we all have 50 to 60,000 thoughts happening a day, which is crazy as I even say that out loud. But we're not noticing a lot of thoughts. It's just certain thoughts, they hook us in. So when I think about mindfulness, it's around quieting the minds, which then in turn allows you to be able to be in the present moment and then just going moment to moment to moment to moment. So if you think about being mindful, it's when your thoughts are in the past and you're ruminating, you bring them back to the present moment. When your thoughts are now in anxiety, which is now you've gone to the future because you're thinking about things that might happen that a lot of them never even end up happening. And you're all these thoughts. Again, you've noticed that that your thoughts have gone out to the future. You're bringing yourself back. So it's moment by moment by moment, bringing yourself back to the present moments. And then when you're in that present moment, you start to feel more connected to yourself, connected to the people around you, connected to the moment. You can feel more joy for just being alive in this moment, right? How often is we're thinking about all these things and it's like, oh, I'm just going to return to my breath and breathe. Oh, I'm alive. Like I'm alive right now. I'm alive. Like think about all these thoughts. My thoughts are all over the place. And then it can just bring you back and ground you in this moment.
Oh, that's good stuff. Now, you'd mentioned Carol Dweck's work while you were talking there. Now, do you have any other resources or any books, anything that we could really look to for help in any of these areas?
So I love reading. So I love that question because I have a lot of books that I could recommend. So I'm just going to recommend a couple on the topics that we spoke about today. So when I'm thinking about emotional intelligence, there's a new book that came out this year. Well, now we're in 2021. So back in 2020 in the spring that I really like for emotions. And it's called Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett's. And then another one around emotional intelligence is called Emotional Agility by Susan David. I really, really love that book. When we start to think about mindfulness, one of my mindfulness teachers is Eckhart Tolle. So I really like The Power of Now. And he has a couple of other books as well that he's written. And then when you think about self-leadership and what that looks like to really show up as a conscious leader, I really appreciate a book that's called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Some great resources that get you thinking about that. And the beauty with a lot of these books is if you go onto the author's websites, they sometimes have other resources, videos, apps that you can use. The other thing that shows up for me in this moment, I love all of Brene Brown's books, but she also has a really great podcast called Dare to Lead.
Excellent. And as we're on resources, and you left off by mentioning Brene Brown's podcast, we haven't talked about your podcast at all. So could we talk about the Inspirational Leadership Podcast?
Yes, I would love to talk about it. Yes, I have a podcast called Inspirational Leadership that I started about 18 months ago now. And in the catalyst for starting the podcast, it really was a passion project. And it's because I'm really, really care about the mission, my mission, which is to humanize work and transform leaders globally. And I really wanted to be able to have a platform where it can reach more people because I really believe in being able to have conversations and dialogues with people all over the world. And so it's been amazing in terms of the interviews, the power of technology, just like our conversation that we're having right now, Brian, you can be located anywhere in the world. But speaking to different people. And so I love talking with CEOs, CEOs who get this, who are progressive organizations and they're doing this stuff, right? They understand the emotional intelligence and the mindset and creating positive work cultures. So CEOs can hear from other CEOs that this is what it looks like to do it. And this is the amazing results and how it impacts the return on investment. These are very successful businesses that are approaching it like that. So I think it's great to hear from the CEOs, but then also strategic HR leaders and leadership development experts who are also doing this work and bring in different perspectives around how they go about creating these kinds of shifts in the world. And I'm a big believer in inclusivity. So it's been a pleasure to be able to use my platform to have other people in the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging space, LGBTQ community, so that they can also be talking about what it looks like to create these workplaces where, because humanizing work from my perspective is creating inclusive environments as well.
Excellent. Now, we talked about the podcast. Is there anything that you're working on that you'd like to share with us? What can we look forward to from you in the future?
Yeah, I'm going to be continuing to work with organizations. So if you think about around helping them build more of that emotional intelligence in their companies. So whether that's me coming in and keynoting or doing training, doing executive coaching, where it's helping those leaders. When you start to go on this journey, it's not something that happens overnight. So we live in this instant gratification, Amazon Prime world and want to just like, oh, okay, we're done. We're emotionally intelligent. It's a lot of experimenting, trial and errors. Some things work, some things don't. And I would love to see more leaders getting support where they can have a safe space to be working on this. So, and I have seen a lot more organizations supporting their leaders in this way. So I'm going to continue to do that. I do have plans later in this year to have some high potential programs when I'm working with a small cohort of leaders. Because I think there's something about having a group of leaders going on this journey together and to learn from one another and recognize that they're not alone. Because being a leader can sometimes feel lonely too. And I really think it's important to have peers and mentors where you can talk through the day-to-day, because there's a lot of difficult stuff that happens on that journey as well.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned something that made me just think of another question that I want to bring up to you, and it kind of ties back to the individual contributor who gets promoted to being a leader. When you talk about it being lonely, for someone who's an individual contributor, a lot of times, when you get promoted, you're now in charge. You have charge over people who are your coworkers. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Like, I have my own theories and philosophies, but what are your thoughts on managing people who used to be your colleagues?
Thank you for bringing that up, because it's a dynamic that people don't necessarily talk a lot about, right? That person was previously your friend, and now that you went into that leadership and now you're the boss. And now in terms of confidentiality, there were things that you could be sharing with sharing with each other all the time. Now you're in a different position where there's things that you can no longer share, like it's not appropriate. So it is a change in dynamic. And to be honest, sometimes it can't survive. Like there are some times where people just can't wrap their head around and it's not about that leader. It's that individual. They're experiencing what they're experiencing in their journey. And so it's not personal, but they don't feel like they can have the same relationship with you. So for me, the number one thing that shows up for me when you ask that question, Brian, is new boundaries do have to be created. It's not going to be the same relationship as it was before. And so I think it's about talking about what that looks like and what, if possible, like having a one-on-one conversation with them and saying, our friendship is not going to change, but there are going to be some dynamics that I can't share in the same way. And just like you would have with anybody else, like how do we want to set ourselves up for success and having really good communication? Personally, I think that should be happening with all individuals when you go from not being a leader and now all of a sudden you have a team working with you. I've seen lots of leaders who have gone into positions and I'm now reporting to them, and that never happens. Like there's never one-on-one around. So tell me, how are things going before? What would you like to see more of, less of? What have been some of the struggles? What went really well with your last leader? How can I best support you? Sometimes those dialogues don't happen.
Right. And I think just kind of going back to that situation of the individual contributor who becomes the leader, one of the things, obviously it's challenging when you're trying to balance friendships and work. I think one of the things that kind of gets missed a lot of times is that can create an unfair situation for the colleague who happens to be that same individual contributor. Say, for example, you have Mark and Steve, for example. Mark ends up becoming the manager, and now there's layoffs. Now Steve doesn't get laid off. What is the what's the thought behind that? Like, what kind of environment is that going to create? It's going to, obviously, the first assumption, regardless of what the truth is he kept his job because he's friends with the boss.
Yes. That's a really, really good point, right? How can you be unbiased with your decisions with that individual when like the assumptions can be made? And are the assumptions right? And it's difficult with what you just used in that example. That person could be the high performer. Like that could be the person who's actually doing the best on the team and happens to be the friends. Or it might be a scenario where they aren't the highest performer on the team and he was the person who had to be let go. And you bring up a really important point, because this is something that I see show up so often with leaders. And I'm sure you see this a lot as well, not wanting to deal with conflict. And so there's conflict that shows up that the right decision might be letting that person go. But whether it's a friend or not a friend, right? It's even when you have a team and there's an individual where you just might have a stronger relationship with that individual to the other. But in terms of the makeup of that team and the high performance of the team and knowing who has the skills and talents to be able to take you where you need to go, it's actually maybe letting go this person. But it's a difficult conversation that they don't want to have. And I'm not even talking about layoffs. I'm just talking about they might have to let this person go and bring somebody else on the team in order for the team to be more effective. But instead they stay complacent and just say, oh, I'd rather not deal with this. And then the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger and builds. And then 3 years later, I said, the question is, if you could do anything differently, what would that have been? Oh, it would be to have that difficult conversation I needed to have 3 years ago and let that person go.
Yeah, because it could even be just with disciplinary issues, right? If somebody's your friend and you can't separate the two, it might be difficult for you to have that conversation. It's challenging to write somebody up and then, at the end of the conversation, all right, are we still on for drinks tonight?
Yes.
Like it's
Yes.
So for me, my approach has always been, I want to be friendly with everybody, but I'm not necessarily going to be the friend. And it makes it tough, but in situations you don't want to create difficult scenarios for other people as well. So if there's a group function that you get invited to, I would probably be one of the first people to leave, just so everybody can, they don't have to have that feeling that, okay, the boss is here. I can't, I can't be myself. So yeah, it's just certain things that you have to, and then again, there's no real instruction. There's no real set of guidelines or instructions to follow when you're in that situation.
I just want to reflect back to you, Brian. I hear that you have very good boundaries, and some people really can struggle with that, right? It's like making the decision, like what's boundaries and also integrity, right? It's recognizing what's the best decision to make here. And sometimes people know what the right decision is, but they don't actually act on it and make what the best choice is. And it reminded me, as you were saying that, Brian, as well, I remember people talking about when you start to have kids and, oh, my kids are my friends. I'm like, I love my kids, but we're also not friends. Like I have a role to play right now. And there's going to be times where we might have to make some difficult choices and say no to things. And that's important. I'm teaching them a lot of lessons that are going to serve them later in life. And so it again reminds me of those boundaries. Like, of course, you want to show up in a loving way, but there are times that your role is to say things that they don't want to hear.
Yeah, no, I think my kids have definitely helped me in that area because there's, I have 4 children myself, and they're all very different. It's a lot of, you can apply a lot of the same principles because you're dealing with individuals, and even though they, they're in the same house, they have the same parents, they're all very different. So you have to really understand the personalities and what's going to work for one versus another.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sure there have been times where you had to have difficult conversations. And I really feel like assertiveness, which is about being direct, yet respectful and being kind, it's an important skill to have as a leader as well. There's times where you have to say things that are difficult and you can't, not everybody's going to love you. Not everyone's going to like you. The decision, a lot of times, not every single person's going to like that decision. And that's what it looks like to be a leader. You have to make what's the best decision for the business, for your team, and not everybody's going to like it.
Yeah. And I think people have heard me say this on the show if you're a regular listener, but sometimes you're just making the least bad decision because there's not really a good option.
That was, I would just heard Barack Obama in an interview with Brene Brown, and he said that exact thing, that there's no like magic bullet, like the perfect decision. He said the same thing, like sometimes it was having to shift something and change the way things were currently happening. And then what the decision is still not the perfect decision, but it was just a little bit better than the decision that was made before.
Yeah, exactly. And, another person who I like their literature is Thomas Sowell. And one of the things that he says is that there's not, there's not really solutions, but there's trade-offs.
Yeah.
So, if you make a decision, it's going to impact something else. So there's going to be some kind of collateral effect from every decision that you make. So I kind of try to take that approach as well. I try to think about what this decision is going to impact and what ramifications that could have.
Yes, there are trade-offs.
Absolutely. Now, we've covered a lot. Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to discuss?
Brian, you asked such great questions that I feel like we really got to dig into things today, and I really appreciate that. So I don't feel like there's a question that you didn't ask. I think that where we went was wonderful.
Perfect. All right. Well, I guess as we start to close here, is there a special message that you would like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Yeah, what comes up for me in this moment, we're in 2021 and still in a global pandemic, is that if I could encourage everybody to really lean into compassion. And when I say compassion for others, but also self-compassion for yourself, and give yourself a lot of love and grace and self-care. Right now, we're all experiencing the full range of emotions. And if you're not, then that means you're suppressing them because they're there. And just, as Mark Brackett says in his book, like, give yourself permission to feel, give yourself the space and time to be with what shows up, but definitely leaning into empathy and compassion and trying to look for ways to be able to see the human in front of you and help each person feel seen and heard, because we're all going through different challenges and people might not be sharing them, and compassion goes a long way.
Absolutely. Now, for those who want to connect with you, what's the best way to connect with you if we want to work with you, if we want to learn more, or if we just want to reach out?
Yeah. So I'm very active on social media. So on LinkedIn, Twitter's, the Instagram, you can find me at Kristen Harcourt. And then same thing for my website. It's kristenharcourt.com. And I love connecting with people. So any other questions, reflections, thoughts, please reach out, and you can subscribe on my website to the Inspirational Leadership Podcast if you're interested in more conversations around leadership.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on today, Kristen. I appreciate the conversation, and I feel like it was a great conversation. So again, thank you for that.
Thank you for the privilege of being here, Brian. I really, really enjoyed it as well.
And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us next time when we're joined by David LaRose as we discuss gaining buy-in for your security projects. The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.